Ron Wyatt was born in 1933 and died in 1999. He was an amateur archaeologist and adventurer who discovered numerous biblical sites and artifacts. His claims are highly contested by mainstream archaeology and creationists alike. However, none of them have been able to, or willing to, examine any of his evidence. Here's a list of his claims and evidence to go along with them. And I'm going to try to do it chronologically. The true site of Noah's Ark he discovered somewhere around 1977 to 1978. He found Noah's Ark remains at the Jupiter site near Mount Ararat in Turkey. It's also known as the boat-shaped formation or the boat-shaped object on Doomsday Mountain. He discovered the boat-shaped structure, the petrified rivet work, petrified wood, and a chunk of deck timber that was presented to him as a gift from the Turkish government when the Turkish government acknowledged the site to be the resting area of Noah's Ark. Lastly, he also discovered in the surrounding area the drudge stones, which were the giant anchor stones that they used to attach to the ark. One of these anchor stones even depicted a rainbow over a boat, animals exiting away from the boat, and 8 cross shapes, which they believed to represent Noah, his wife, his sons, and his sons' wives. The next discovery was the Red Sea crossing. This would have been somewhere around 1978 to 1984. He identified the spot where Moses crossed the Red Sea at the Nuweiba Beach, Egypt. He found underwater chariot wheels in coral formations matching those of chariots, few sand on the beach, which would have been from where the pillar of fire had crossed over. The sand on the beach got so hot it fused together, almost sort of like the effect that glass has. And on either side of the crossing there were 2 pillars erected by King Solomon, marking that this was the Red Sea crossing of Moses. His third discovery was that of Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia, the Jebel El-Oz. This would have been 1978 to 1985. In that time range is when he was making his discoveries.
3 weary Americans came home Monday night. Ronald Wyatt and his sons Daniel and Ronald Jr. returned to Nashville at the end of an amateur archaeology expedition that landed them in a Saudi Arabian jail. They entered Saudi Arabia illegally, searching for the site of the biblical Mount Sinai. Ronald Wyatt and his sons are with us in the studios of our Nashville affiliate WTVF to tell us all about it. Gentlemen, good morning.
Morning. Morning.
Mr. Wyatt, you there in the middle, and
yes.
Your sons on either side. Why did you, I didn't know that Mount Sinai was in Saudi Arabian territory. Why did you think it was?
We found some chariot parts that looked like the chariots found in King Tut's tomb in the Gulf of Aqaba, west of this Jebel El-Oz. We found these at depths from 60 feet out to 200 feet and over a stretch of about 1.5 miles. And we believe that that was the crossing site.
Thank you very much for joining us from Nashville this morning. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's nice to be back.
He located the real Mount Sinai, not in Egypt's Sinai Peninsula, but in northwestern Saudi Arabia. He found the burnt mountaintop. He still has the stones that are scorched black on one side, but not on the other. They found the stone altar with carvings of calves, the split rock, which was actually discovered after Ron Wyatt's time, but it further solidifies that this is in fact the location of the real Mount Sinai. They even discovered ancient hieroglyphic markings all over the area, and the pillars that would have been erected for each tribe. The Saudi Arabian government has made this location a tourist attraction, and they openly claim that this is in fact the mountain of God where Moses would have brought the children of Israel. The location of Sodom and Gomorrah, 1978 to 1980. He found the remains of the biblical cities near the Dead Sea. His evidence were ash and brimstone, large sulfur balls found in the area, and even the remains of some bones that were petrified. And even the remains of some bones that were petrified, which you can clearly make out to be a femur. The location is still contested by mainstream creationists.
I drove back and forth through there many times. You have to go past there to get to Kadesh. You have to go past there to get to the Red Sea crossing site. And I did stop and show my workers, my two sons and whoever else was helping us, this ash, because the road went right through the middle of it down at the Zoar area. And, I showed them this soft stuff. I said, this is bound to be what's left of those cities, where the cities of the plains once enjoyed a beautiful and very prosperous existence. The place where Lot chose, rather than the mountains, to feed his flocks and herds and raise his family. And you'll notice here that we have several feet of nothing but white powdery ash. Ash that's only produced when material is burned at degree temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The stuff crumbles to powder in your hand, sticks to your clothes. It's just pure ash.
The anchor stones of Noah's Ark, 1978 to 1979. He found large drug stones. These are the ones that were found around Noah's Ark. The discovery of the stones came after the fact. The large drudge stones near the Ark site of Jupiter. One of the stones depicted a rainbow over a boat with animals walking away from the boat. There were also the 8 crosses carved into it I mentioned earlier, and they believe that to be the representation of the 8 people that survived the worldwide flood. Now, similar stones exist in the area, and mainstream archaeology attributes them to ancient culture, not specifically or necessarily directly to Noah's Ark. I would obviously say, okay, sure, because it's kind of weird that these ancient cultures would carve a depiction of Noah's Ark where they found Noah's Ark.
Was that an outcropping of stone that these people had gone up and dressed with hammers and chisel, and from a distance, the distance, by the way, of their monastery, it looked a good deal like the end of a boat sticking out of the mountain.
The burial site of Noah's wife in 1990 to 1992 was found near the Ark site there in Turkey mentioned above. Ron Wyatt's family still possesses the finger bone from the grave site. I've actually held it in my hand personally, and it's about 7 to 8 inches in length. It's very long, and you can even see in the bone where they had early signs of arthritis.
Say a wild animal could not have gotten through, but on the inside there was a very large opening, and the window casing was at quite an angle. That way, the little bit of light that entered the hole would be...
The true site of the crucifixion of Jesus, 1984 to 1986. Ron identified Golgotha and claimed the Ark of the Covenant was directly below, with the blood still on the mercy seat that had got there through a crack leading from the cave opening all the way up to where the cross hole that would have held Jesus' cross was. And they still have the stone that covered the cross to this day. The Ark of the Covenant, 1979 to 1982. Discovered in a cave beneath the site of Jesus' crucifixion in Jerusalem. Ron Wyatt found the ark with the blood on the mercy seat.
Leviticus 17:14 informs us that the life of all flesh is the blood thereof. Once again, scientists are finding out that the truths of Scripture are far more literal than they ever imagined. Tiny particles have been discovered in blood that are seemingly indestructible. These tiny particles are less than 1/10 of a micron in size, and while they cannot be seen using standard medical microscopes, new methods of microscopy have been developed which makes it possible to see them in their living state. The French scientist Gaston Naessens designed special microscope components that would allow him to see these particles, which he entitles somatids, meaning the body that creates. Through experimentation, Professor Naessens found that these somatids contain genetic material yet to be fully understood by the scientific community. They are polymorphic in nature, growing from stage to stage, and are unaffected by high temperatures, extremely toxic chemicals, or even nuclear radiation. Professor Naessens believes these somatids to be subcellular living and reproducing entities, the precursor of DNA, and that they may be the building blocks of life. About 6 years ago, I learned about these particles as a result of some research that I was conducting, which was totally non-related to archaeology. At that time, I was using a standard medical microscope, and while I could not see these particles, I knew they had to be there. I began to develop my own microscope patterned after the design of Professor Naessens. What you see behind me is that microscope in its latest stage of development. The microscope employs an extremely bright xenon or mercury light source, which can be combined with tungsten light. The light is directed across the microscopic specimen rather than on or through it in what is known as a dark field configuration. The light reflecting off the object is transmitted through the microscope and is magnified over 1,000 times. The image is then captured by a sensitive CCD camera and transmitted to a monitor for viewing at screen magnifications of up to 30,000x. Under these conditions, the tiny living particles can plainly be seen against a dark background. In 1996, my family and I made a trip to Nashville to visit the Wyatts. I brought along the microscope, which at that time was somewhat portable in its early stage of development, and set it up in the basement of the Wyatt's house. One evening, Mary Nell Wyatt asked me to take a look at some material from a burial cave to see if these tiny particles were present. Without my knowledge, one of the samples was actually the blood sample that Ron had taken from the Ark of the Covenant dig. The sample was placed under the microscope, and as the specimen began to come into focus, thousands of tiny particles, somatids if you will, became plainly visible. At that time, Mary Nell, who was standing behind me, began to weep. As I turned around and saw the expression on her face, I realized immediately that the sample we were looking at was actually the sample that Ron had found to be the blood of Christ. Okay, Mary Nell's going to take the sample and mix it with sterile water. And a test tube there that we that'll be enough.
Okay.
And she's going to take some sterile water and a little bit, just a drop's all we need right now. Okay, so now that we've got the sample on the slide, we'll go ahead and focus into the sample and see what comes up on the screen here. And there they are, thousands of living particles, less than 1/4 of a micron in size. The spores are maybe a 1/2 micron, and but most of those little particles that you're looking at is 17,000 x magnified on the screen 17,000 times. You know, in the Bible it tells us that the life is in the blood, and there's little living particles that most people are unaware that are there. And this is the same thing we see in living blood. The scientist in Canada says that these things never die. The blood may dry up, but these things, he says, they're indestructible, and he says they are the basis of life.
Ron Wyatt went through mass amounts of mocking and doubt, leading to hatred of his name even at times. The vast amount of his research was self-funded. Ron Wyatt's life was at risk multiple times traveling to the Middle East. He even endured kidnapping from terrorist groups who held him hostage. After Wyatt's death in 1999, his sons, his wife Mary Nell, and his supporters, the Wyatt Archaeological Museum in Tennessee, continued to promote his work. Eventually, the museum was closed down, and the remaining sole support for Ron Wyatt is his family members, namely his widowed wife Mary Nell. It has, however, inspired some newer creation ministries, such as myself, to take an eye to Ron Wyatt, because all of these claims are going to be solidified over the next 5 to 10 years, and none of the credit is going to be given to Ron Wyatt. They're going to try to forget his name because of the amount of mockery that he underwent. It would be too much eating crow to then say after his death, and after they've continued to mock him and put articles in their work, even lately as far as the last year, and then to apologize to the Wyatt family, they couldn't do it. So ministries like Proverbs Guys, we make it our mission to make sure that you know who Ron Wyatt is, because all of these claims are about to be solidified, and as they're solidified, we want you to remember that the credit goes to God, of course, but his instrument that he used for these discoveries was Ron Wyatt, and Ron definitely deserves the credit for these discoveries before it's taken by other creationists who don't deserve it. Ron passed away in 1999, and his work is continued.